It happened when the sky went dark, when the world turned to smoke and prayers. And in that very breath of fear, Grant found Sarah. Two strangers, holding on to each other like the last promise on earth. The fire roared, the ground trembled, but their hearts kept saying the same thing. Stay with me, just stay with me. Somewhere between the falling towers and the rising sun, love dared to whisper in the ruin. And Lord, it whispered so sweet, even heaven had to stop and listen. The morning air in New York was thick that day, heavy like it knew something was about to break. Grant was late for work, his tie hanging loose, his coffee untouched on the counter. He was a small-town boy from Georgia who came to the city chasing big dreams. The kind of dreams that always seemed taller than the buildings themselves. He didn't have much, but he had faith, and that was enough for him. Sarah was across town, laughing as she buttoned her blue blouse, the one she wore whenever she needed a bit of luck. She worked on the 91st floor of the North Tower, answering phones and typing memos that never seemed to matter. But that morning, something felt different. She couldn't tell what it was, just a soft ache in her chest, like the world had taken a deep breath and hadn't let it out. Grant met her 2 weeks before that day. He had spilled his coffee on her shoes outside a subway station. She should have been angry, but she laughed instead. A laugh so gentle it could melt stone. They walked together that morning, talking about small things that somehow felt big. Home, music, faith, and how the city lights made the stars jealous. They started meeting every day after that. By the river, under bridges, or in quiet corners of cafes where time didn't move so fast. It was young love, fragile but fierce. The kind that makes even noise feel like music. But as the sun climbed that September morning, fate started to move its pieces. And before the hour turned, the sky above New York would tear open, and two hearts would find themselves standing in the middle of history, trying to hold on to love when the world itself was falling apart. The next day, Grant woke before sunrise. The city was still half asleep, the streets quiet except for the sound of buses sighing and pigeons pecking at forgotten crumbs. He walked to the same cafe where Sarah liked to stop before work. The barista already knew what to make. One black coffee for him, one with too much sugar for her. He sat near the window, waiting. He could always tell when she was coming. Her shadow would fall across the glass before she even opened the door. And when she did, the whole cafe seemed to wake up. "Morning, stranger," she said, her voice soft and teasing. "Morning trouble," he replied, grinning. That was their thing. Gentle words wrapped in laughter. They talked about everything and nothing. How the subway always smelled like metal, how pigeons seemed braver than people, how maybe life was just a long walk home. Sometimes Sarah would stare out the window, her smile fading for a heartbeat. "You ever feel like something big's waiting for you, Grant? Something you can't see yet, but you can feel it?" Grant nodded, but he didn't say what he felt. He didn't tell her that sometimes. When the wind blew between the tall buildings, it sounded like a warning. Like the city was whispering that love and safety don't always live in the same place. That night, he walked her to her door. The streetlights hummed, and the air was heavy with the smell of rain. He wanted to tell her how deep she'd gotten under his skin, but the words sat heavy on his tongue. Instead, he said, "See you tomorrow." She smiled. "Tomorrow," she whispered, but even the stars that night seemed unsure if they could promise that. The next week moved fast. The kind of fast that makes you forget how fragile time really is. They began to plan little things. A trip to the countryside, maybe Christmas in Georgia. Sarah said she wanted to meet his mother, the woman who raised him on hymns and hope. Grant's mother had always told him, "Son, some loves come easy, but the good ones, they come with a storm." And he didn't understand it then, but he would. They sat one evening near the Hudson, their legs swinging over the river wall, the wind tugging at her hair. "I think I love you," she said suddenly, like a secret that had been burning to get out. Grant blinked, caught between breath and disbelief. Then he smiled, slow and real. "Then I reckon I love you too." They laughed, kissed, and let the city fade into the background. The world felt steady again. For a moment, the noise stopped, the ground held still, and love, that quiet, sacred thing, sat between them like an old song. But fate, cruel and quiet, had already begun to write the next page. Somewhere above them, a plane was preparing for a journey it would never finish. And in 2 days' time, the sky itself would remember their names. September 11th began like any other day. Sarah woke early, tying her hair with a ribbon Grant gave her the night before. She left a note on her kitchen table. "See you by the river, after work." Grant was running late again. The train stalled underground for what felt like hours, and by the time he came out into the light, he could see the towers standing tall and proud against the morning sun. Then, a sound split the sky. Not thunder, not wind. It was a scream of metal, sharp and endless. People froze. Grant turned just in time to see fire bloom against the blue. The North Tower, Sarah's tower. His heart stopped, then started again like it was trying to outrun death itself. He ran toward the building, against the crowd, against the sirens, against everything that made sense. Smoke and glass fell like black snow. He shouted her name until his voice broke. "Sarah! Sarah!" No answer. Only chaos. Only the sound of a world breaking open. He tried to push past the police line, but a hand pulled him back. Strong, desperate. "You can't go in there," a man yelled. Grant's eyes burned. "She's in there. My Sarah's in there." But the man just shook his head. And above them, the tower burned like the world's last candle. Hours felt like years. The city turned gray with ash. People wandered in silence, covered in dust, faces blank with disbelief. Grant sat on the curb, holding her ribbon in his hand, whispering her name like it was a prayer that could turn back time. He refused to leave. He waited, even as night fell and the smoke thickened. Firefighters walked past him, eyes hollow. One stopped, knelt beside him, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son," he said softly, "sometimes love can't fight fire." Grant didn't answer. He just stared at the skyline that wasn't there anymore. The next morning, they found him still sitting there, the ribbon wrapped around his wrist. His eyes red, but dry. He wasn't crying anymore. He was somewhere else, halfway between this world and the one that had taken Sarah away. And when the second tower fell, it took what was left of his heart with it. The days that followed were a blur. Names filled the newspapers. Faces on missing posters fluttered in the wind. Grant walked the streets like a ghost. He kept hearing her laugh, smelling her perfume, seeing her reflection in every window he passed. One night, he went back to the river, their river. He sat in their spot and talked to her like she was still there. "You remember that day, Sarah?" he whispered. "You said tomorrow. You promised me tomorrow." The wind stirred the water, carrying his voice away. He took off the ribbon, tied it to the railing, and watched it dance in the wind. "If love don't die, then neither will I," he said softly. Nobody saw him jump. They found his shoes by the river the next morning, side by side, as neat as prayer books. The ribbon still fluttered nearby. The color faded, but the promise still alive. And the city, broken and breathless, kept moving, carrying the echo of two souls who met in the middle of chaos and loved in the face of fire. They said the river carried him far that night. Some fishermen found his body 2 days later, washed up near the old pier, face peaceful like he had finally found her again. The ribbon was still on his wrist, tangled but holding fast. The water had cooled his pain, and maybe, just maybe, the current had been kind enough to take his soul straight to where Sarah waited. The city mourned 1,000 stories that week, but theirs was one no one wrote down. Just whispers passed between strangers. "Did you hear about the boy who went looking for his girl? And then, he found her, didn't he?" Grant's mother came up from Georgia, her hair tied in a gray scarf, her voice trembling with prayers that never reached heaven. She stood by the river where he was found and said, "My boy always believed love could outswim death." Then she dropped a small wooden cross into the water and watched it drift away. The news moved on, the smoke cleared, and the world tried to forget. But the river remembered. It always remembers. When the wind blew just right, folks said you could still hear laughter by the water. A man's and a woman's, soft and far away. Years passed, and New York grew quiet again. New buildings rose, new lives began. But near the memorial, an old man sold sketches of the towers, and if you looked close, you'd see a small detail in each one. Two tiny figures holding hands at the top. He said he dreamed of them often. The boy's name was Grant, he'd tell curious folks. And the girl, she was Sarah. They met by accident and left by fate. Some people smiled politely and walked away, thinking it just an old man's tale. But others stayed and listened, drawn in by the way he spoke, slow and steady, like memory itself. They loved when the sky was blue, he'd say, and the world turned gray to keep them together. Children would ask, "Did they go to heaven?" He'd nod, eyes soft as dusk. They went higher than the towers ever stood. And then he'd close his book of drawings and stare out at the skyline, whispering, "They're still holding hands." One autumn evening, a young woman stood by the river, clutching a letter she'd found in an old bookstore downtown. The paper was yellowed, the words fading, but she could still read them. "Dear Sarah, if tomorrow ever takes me, I'll find you in the next sunrise. Love, Grant." The woman wiped her eyes, even though she didn't know them. She tied a small white flower to the railing beside the old ribbon, now torn and frayed, and whispered, "You kept your promise." That night, the wind shifted. The river rippled in the moonlight, and for a breath of time, it looked like two shadows walking side by side across the water. Some say that's just how love works. It don't die, it just changes shape. It lingers in small things, in laughter, in letters, in the way sunlight hits the water after rain. Grant and Sarah became part of that kind of love. The quiet kind that outlives the people who carried it. The kind that slips into stories told on front porches when the crickets are loud and the night feels holy. And if you ever sit by that river, in the hush between one wave and the next, you might hear it. A soft, shared breath between two souls who met in the chaos of fire and found peace in the current. Down in Georgia, Grant's mother kept a photograph of him and Sarah. They had taken it a week before it all happened. He had one arm around her. She was laughing with her eyes closed, and the city lights blurred behind them like stars trying to find their place. Every year, on the same September morning, she'd pour 2 cups of coffee, set one beside his picture, and hum the hymn he loved best. "Precious Lord, take my hand," she'd whisper. And though her heart never healed, she said she felt warmth whenever she did it. Like he was right there, smiling that boyish smile, with Sarah by his side. Some folks say love stories are meant to end with forever. But forever ain't always about time. Sometimes, it's about truth. And the truth is, Grant and Sarah didn't get forever in years. They got it in moments, the ones that burn so bright, they keep shining even when everything else turns to ash. Their story became one of those old porch tales, passed down slow, in a voice that carries sorrow and sweetness all the same. A story about 2 souls who found each other when the world was falling apart, and held on until it carried them home. The city healed, but not all hearts did. Some scars don't fade. They just learn to breathe quieter. A few years after the towers fell, they built pools of water where the buildings once stood. The sound of falling water filled the air, gentle and endless. People came from all over the world to stand there, to weep, to remember, to whisper names the world had tried to forget. One morning, as the sun broke through the mist, a young soldier stood beside the memorial. He looked no older than Grant had been. In his hand, he held a faded photograph. 2 people smiling in front of a river. The writing on the back said, "Grant and Sarah found each other, lost the world." He placed it at the edge of the pool, pressed his fingers to the names carved in stone, and closed his eyes. "Rest easy," he whispered. "You're remembered." The wind lifted his words, carried them up and over the city. A city still made of dreams, still learning to trust the sky again. That same week, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes came to New York for the first time. Her name was Mary, Grant's mother. She walked slowly through the streets her son once loved, her cane tapping softly against the pavement. She stopped by the river where the old railing still stood. The ribbon was long gone, but she could feel something there, something alive in the air. She touched the metal, closed her eyes, and smiled through tears. "My boy," she whispered. "I came to see where you loved her. I came to see where you found forever." A stranger walking by offered her a flower, a single white lily. Mary took it, kissed the petals, and let it float down the river. It drifted until the current swallowed it whole, carrying her love to wherever souls go when the world can't hold them anymore. Back home in Georgia, she planted 2 magnolia trees in her yard, one for Grant, one for Sarah. Every spring, they bloomed side by side, white petals glowing in the morning light. Folks in town began to notice. Some swore they heard whispers when the wind passed through the branches. 2 voices, laughing soft as a prayer. And when the flowers fell, they always landed close together. Like even in death, those trees remembered what love had taught them. One summer afternoon, a preacher came by to bless the trees. He stood with his hat off and said, "Sometimes, the Lord borrows people just long enough to teach the rest of us how to love." Mary nodded, tears glistening. Then he surely borrowed 2 of the best. Years rolled on. Children grew. The world spun faster, and memories faded into the corners of time. But stories have a way of lasting longer than the people who lived them. Down by the old church, there was a porch where folks gathered on Sunday evenings. Someone would strum a guitar, another would hum, and sooner or later, someone would say, "Tell that one again," the one about the 2 lovers who met on the day the sky broke, and the story would come alive again. The young ones would lean forward, eyes wide. The old ones would close theirs, remembering. "They say Grant ran toward the fire when everyone else was running away," the storyteller would say. "And they say Sarah waited for him in the smoke, smiling like she already knew he was coming." No one ever spoke after that part. Just silence, sweet and heavy, like the pause after a hymn. One day, a filmmaker visited that little Georgia town. He had heard whispers of the tale, of the boy and girl who found each other in chaos. He wanted to make a movie about them. Mary met him on her porch, rocking slow, the magnolias swaying behind her. "You can tell their story," she said. "But promise me this, don't make it about the towers. Make it about the love. That's what outlasted the fire." The filmmaker nodded, eyes misty. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "About the love. That movie was never a blockbuster. It wasn't made for fame. But it found its way into hearts. Quiet hearts, lonely ones, grieving ones. People watched it and remembered someone they once lost. And that was enough. On the 20th anniversary, the river was calm again. New buildings stood tall where the old ones once reached for the clouds. But near the memorial, a small candle flickered beside 2 names etched close together. A man passing by stopped to look. He smiled softly, almost as if he knew them. "Grant and Sarah," he whispered, tracing the letters. "Still side by side." And as he turned to leave, a gentle gust of wind blew through the street, carrying the faint scent of magnolias, even in the heart of the city. Some said it was coincidence. Others said it was memory. But the old souls, the porch storytellers, they knew better. They said it was love walking the earth again, the kind that doesn't end, not even when the world burns. Time moved on, but some stories never left the wind. In Georgia, the 2 magnolia trees grew tall and proud. Their roots tangled deep, their branches leaning into each other like they were whispering old secrets. Folks driving past would slow down just to look. Some said the trees were alive with spirits, the boy and girl who refused to let death make them strangers. Mary would sit beneath those trees every evening. The radio played old hymns, and the air smelled of rain and earth. She'd talk to them like she was talking to her children. "Grant, Sarah," she'd say, "the world's changed a lot since you left, but I hope you still dance where you are." Sometimes, when twilight crept across the yard, she'd swear she saw 2 shadows moving, hand in hand between the trunks. Not ghosts, not dreams, just the shape of love remembering itself. And even though she was old and tired, she found peace in that. Because love like that never really dies. It just learns to speak softer. Years later, after Mary passed, the town gathered to say goodbye. They buried her right beside the magnolias. The preacher stood under the blooming branches and said, "She waited long enough. Now she's gone to see her boy." As they lowered her into the earth, a wind stirred through the trees, gentle, almost playful. The petals fell like snow, blanketing her coffin in white. Someone in the crowd gasped softly. Someone else began to hum. And in that moment, folks said they heard it. Laughter, faint and far away, carried on the wind. "Grant?" a little girl whispered, clutching her mother's hand. "Maybe, baby," her mother said. "Maybe it's him. Maybe it's all of them." Saying thank you. The magnolias kept blooming that whole season, long after the others had wilted. Back in New York, near the river where it all began, a young woman named Clara worked at a bookstore. She was quiet, soft-spoken, with a heart too tender for the noise of the world. One afternoon, while dusting an old shelf, she found a small leather notebook wedged between two forgotten novels. Inside, there were sketches, the towers, the river, and two faces, a man and a woman smiling at each other, drawn with hands that loved what they saw. At the back, a note read, "For Sarah, for the fire that didn't burn our love." Clara felt something stir inside her, something she couldn't name. She took the notebook home, read it every night, and found herself crying without knowing why. One morning, she took it to the memorial. She set it down beside the pool and whispered, "Whoever you were, thank you. You remind me what love should look like." And maybe, just maybe, two unseen souls smiled back. By then, people had started calling the magnolias in Georgia the lovers' trees. Travelers came from faraway towns to see them. Couples carved their initials into the bark, hoping the same magic would touch them too. Old-timers sat nearby, telling the story to anyone who would listen. They met by accident, they'd begin, on a morning full of noise and chance. But when the sky fell, they held on. And when the fire came, they didn't let go. The young folks would listen, quiet and wide-eyed. Some would cry, others would smile. And when the story ended, nobody wanted to speak right away. The silence after was part of the prayer. And sometimes, when the storyteller's voice grew low, a soft wind would brush through the magnolias, as if two spirits leaned close to listen too. 20 years turned into 30. The world kept rushing forward, new wars, new dreams, new heartbreaks. But every September, someone still left a white ribbon at the memorial, tied gently to the steel. Nobody knew who did it. Some said it was a stranger, others said it was family. But the ribbon never failed to appear. It fluttered in the breeze like a living thing, reminding the city that love once burned brighter than the flames that tried to take it. And every year, at that same hour, the sunlight hit the river just right, casting a reflection that looked almost like two figures walking side by side. Maybe it was a trick of light. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe, as the old preacher in Georgia would say, that's just love, still doing what it does best, coming back. By the time the world forgot their names, their story had become a kind of legend, a quiet one, the kind you don't find in history books, but in hearts. Somewhere, a teacher told it to her students as a lesson about courage. Somewhere else, an old man told it to his grandson as proof that love was real. And down south, on a warm Sunday evening, under a sky heavy with the smell of rain and sweetgrass, an old woman told it one more time. Her voice cracked with age but carried the weight of truth. They met when the world was loud, she said, but they loved like the world was still good. And when the towers fell, heaven caught them, not as victims, but as lovers who finished their story in the clouds. The porch grew quiet. Fireflies blinked. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled low, like the earth remembering, and she leaned back in her chair, smiling. "Grant and Sarah," she whispered, still dancing in the smoke. The world changed again. Buildings rose higher, faster. New children grew up never knowing the day the sky broke. But still, somewhere deep in the heart of the city, there was a whisper that would not fade. Taxi drivers spoke of it when the nights were too quiet. Janitors heard it in empty lobbies. Widows felt it in the wind that passed through their curtains. It was the feeling that love had walked these streets before. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that endures. The kind that still leaves warmth in the air long after the fire is gone. One night, a security guard patrolling the memorial swore he saw two shadows standing by the water. A man in a white shirt, a woman in a blue blouse. He blinked once and they were gone. But the scent of magnolia hung in the air. He told no one. Some things are too holy to explain. Far away in Georgia, the lovers' trees had grown wide enough for 3 children to sit between their roots. Folks used to say that if you made a wish under their branches, it would reach whoever you missed. One spring evening, a young couple stood beneath them. The girl was pregnant, belly round as a new moon. She smiled at her husband and said, "Let's name her Sarah." He nodded, voice soft. "Then let's give her Grant for a middle name, so she'll always have courage in her love." The magnolia leaves rustled above them, slow, approving, as if the wind itself had blessed the child before she ever took her first breath. Years later, that same child, Sarah Grant, grew up hearing her parents tell the story of the 2 lovers who never let go. She loved to sit beneath the trees, sketchbook in hand, drawing towers that reached the clouds. When her mother asked what she was sketching, she'd smile and say, "Home." She didn't know why, but sometimes when she drew, she'd feel a warmth behind her, like someone was looking over her shoulder. Sometimes she'd hear a laugh, light and familiar. And once, just once, she swore she heard someone whisper, "Tomorrow." The word lingered in the air, soft as a prayer. When she turned 21, Sarah Grant traveled to New York for the first time. She carried a ribbon and a small jar of magnolia petals from home. At the memorial, she tied the ribbon to the rail, right where the others had been before her, and poured the petals into the water. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing us how to love." The crowd around her hushed for a moment, as if time itself bowed its head. And in that stillness, a small breeze lifted her hair, carrying the faintest scent of magnolia blossoms. She smiled through her tears. "I guess you heard me," she said. That night, as she looked out over the city lights, she felt peace. Somewhere between the stars and the river below, she believed Grant and Sarah were still together. Not as ghosts, but as something purer. Maybe light, maybe love, maybe both. And as she stood there, she whispered the old hymn her grandmother used to sing. "Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light." The city shimmered, and the wind answered with a sigh that sounded like amen. They say every great love story ends where it began, in the heart of a dream. Grant and Sarah's dream began in chaos and ended in calm. The towers fell, but their love rose higher. Fire took their bodies, but the river carried their souls. And the world, in its own quiet way, kept their memory alive. Now, when night falls over New York and the water glows silver under the moon, if you listen close, you might hear them. 2 voices, laughing softly, hand in hand, walking through the smoke toward the light. And somewhere, far away, on a porch in Georgia where magnolias bloom, an old storyteller leans back, rocking slow, saying, "Grant and Sarah, they loved in the fire, they found peace in the river, and they taught the rest of us that real love don't die. It just learns how to shine in the dark."